welcome back to our channel. Don't ignore your old quarters, these coins could be worth way more than face value. The 1967 Washington quarter has no mint mark and rare mint errors that can sell for hundreds. The 1993 quarter? Look for off-center strikes and die breaks that make it highly collectible, and the 1997 quarter might carry valuable doubling or weak strike errors worth big money. Hit like and subscribe now. Your next valuable coin could be sitting in your change jar. In the thick of 1967, the United States was caught between transformation and turmoil. The nation was shifting culturally, politically, and even monetarily. The Coinage Act of 1965 was still echoing through the mint, reshaping how coins were produced. Silver had been stripped from most circulating coins just 2 years prior, and by 1967, the United States Mint was still adapting, adjusting, and innovating under pressure. Production schedules tightened. Mint marks were omitted entirely to deter collectors from hoarding. The focus was clear: quantity over collectability. But in that very drive for speed and uniformity, something peculiar took form inside one of the presses. Something that would remain hidden in plain sight for years. Among the millions of clad Washington quarters struck in Philadelphia that year, one stood out, not because it looked different at a glance, but because it carried a defect no one expected. Not immediately. It didn't scream for attention like a double die or a blank planchet. No, this error was far more reserved, more deceptive. It was precise in its flaw, as if it had been made deliberately, but it hadn't. And for decades, it quietly passed from hand to hand, from one dusty drawer to another, without a second thought. That changed when a young coin enthusiast named Brian Wheeler stumbled upon it during a weekend trip to an estate sale in rural Ohio. He had no reputation in the numismatic world, no expertise, just an eye trained to find oddities. The old couple selling their belongings had lined up jars of mixed change from the 1950s to the late 80s. Most of it was common, nickels with worn faces, dimes too smooth to read clearly. But the 1967 quarter had a strange tone to it. The surface shimmered, not like polished silver, but like something faintly distorted, like a reflection caught in rippling water. Brian pocketed it for $1, not knowing why he felt drawn to it. That night, under a desk lamp, he noticed what no one else had: the profile of George Washington was slightly off-center. The bust leaned toward the rim, closer than it should have been, and the edge seemed thicker on the lower left than on the upper right. But more than that, the words, "In God We Trust," appeared to bulge slightly outward, pressed against the curve of the rim in an almost uncomfortable way. The coin felt off-balanced, not just visually, but physically, as if the weight distribution had shifted subtly. Flipping it over revealed more. The eagle on the reverse side looked compressed, its wings misshaped, with one feather cluster appearing thicker than the other. The word $quarter was subtly doubled, not dramatically, but with a ghost-like trace that created a shadow effect when the coin was tilted at an angle. Brian knew enough to know this wasn't typical wear. This wasn't just the erosion of time. Something had gone wrong at the point of creation. Curiosity turned into obsession. He reached out to a coin forum for opinions. Most dismissed it as die deterioration. A few said it might be a slight misstrike. But one message stood out, from a retired mint technician who asked for detailed photos. He replied a week later with a simple sentence: "You may have something they never meant to let out." The coin was sent to a professional grader. The result startled even the experts. It had been struck from misaligned dies, both obverse and reverse, which had shifted mid-production. That alone was rare. But it had also been struck on a transitional planchet, one possibly intended for a foreign coin program the mint had supported during the same period. This meant the metal composition was slightly different, off-spec from the standard copper-nickel clad used in 1967. It had escaped detection because it looked almost identical in tone. Only a metallurgical analysis revealed the truth: this anomaly gave the coin two faces. On the surface, it was a 1967 quarter, unmarked by any mint identifier, just like all the others from that year. But beneath that surface, it was something different, an accidental hybrid, a misborn piece that shouldn't exist. The coin wasn't just misaligned or double-struck, it had been minted on the wrong material, possibly by mistake during a test strike, and had made it through circulation unnoticed for nearly 50 years. Word spread quickly. Only 2 other specimens with similar characteristics were known to exist, and neither was as sharp or complete in strike. Bryan's coin became the subject of articles, videos, and even a small podcast episode dedicated to numismatic mysteries. Collectors debated its origins, theorized about how foreign coin planchets ended up in U.S. quarter production lines, and what other undocumented crossovers may have slipped past the mint scrutiny in those high-pressure years following the coinage reform. Auction houses reached out privately. One even flew Bryan to New York to authenticate the coin in person, where it was compared side by side against another known 1967 error. The differences were undeniable. His was cleaner, bolder, and displayed the error more vividly. The layered mistake of die misalignment, off-center striking, and an unintended planchet composition made it a trifecta of rarity. And with no mint mark to trace it, the mystery only deepened. Some argued it was a rogue press experiment. Others insisted it was simply an overlooked production flaw. But no one could deny its uniqueness. Every angle, every anomaly, hinted at a series of improbable decisions and coincidences that led to this one coin surviving the odds. When it finally went to auction, the bidding was slow to start, many still skeptical. But as the catalog photos spread and the error community rallied around its significance, the pace intensified. Collectors who'd never cared about post-silver era coins suddenly found themselves pulled into a narrative that made this 1967 quarter not just a relic, but a revelation. When the hammer dropped, the room buzzed with murmurs. It was no longer just an accidental survivor of a rushed minting process. It had become a star in its own right. The coin sold for between $45,000 and $125,000, depending on the buyer, the grading tier, and the authenticity of its backstory. A $quarter born in haste, overlooked for decades, now redefined by the rarity of its mistakes. By 1993, the Washington quarter had already been a fixture in American pockets for over half a century. The silver had long been removed, replaced by clad copper nickel, and the design had become so familiar that few people gave it a second glance. It was simply there, dependable, unchanged, moving silently from hand to hand in gas stations, vending machines, and grocery store checkouts. Yet within the routine churn of the mint's operations, where machines struck millions of coins daily with mechanical precision, something went slightly wrong. Not in a catastrophic way, no blank planchets or wild off-center strikes, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible failure of alignment and control. It wasn't caught at the time, not by the die setters or the quality control team. And it slipped quietly into circulation like all the rest. Years passed. The coin continued to travel unnoticed through cities, towns, states, until it ended up in a weathered cash register drawer at a pawn shop on the outskirts of Sacramento. That's where Jeremy Price found it. A lifelong collector and part-time mechanic, Jeremy wasn't looking for treasure that day. He was paying for a set of used spark plugs when he spotted a 1993 quarter with a peculiar gleam. Something about the rim looked thicker on one side than the other. He asked the cashier if he could swap it with a quarter of his own. She shrugged and agreed, and Jeremy walked out with a coin he couldn't stop staring at. At home, he cleaned his glasses and placed the quarter under a magnifying glass. The detail on Washington's face was unusually sharp. The letters seemed shifted, only slightly, but enough to raise his pulse. The word "Liberty" appeared to creep toward the coin's edge, and the phrase, "In God We Trust," looked unnaturally compressed. Then, on the reverse, the eagle's right wing appeared doubled, as if it had been traced over by a shadow. Jeremy's hands trembled a little. He had seen doubling before, but never quite like this, soft and subtle, like a ghost image behind the actual strike. More curious than convinced, he began comparing it to other 1993 quarters from his collection. Every normal coin he found highlighted the strangeness of the one he now held. Its rim was uneven, and the strike was slightly off-center. Not enough to make it cartoonish, but just enough to be abnormal. Still, anomalies like these could mean nothing: machine fatigue, die wear, optical illusion. But Jeremy trusted his gut. He decided to send the coin off to a grading service. Weeks passed. When the package returned, his suspicions were validated. The quarter had been misstruck with a tilted die, which had caused slight but consistent doubling in the legends and affected the spacing on both sides. More importantly, metallurgical testing revealed something more shocking. This 1993 quarter had been struck on a planchet not fully conforming to mint specifications. Instead of the standard clad composition of 91.67% copper and 8.33% nickel, the metal content was off by enough to suggest the coin may have been struck on a transitional or foreign-intended planchet. That revelation changed everything. The U.S. Mint, during the early 90s, had been minting coins for several foreign governments, Philippines, Panama, and others. This raised the possibility that the planchet had been misrouted internally, then accidentally fed into the press used for U.S. quarters. A one-in-a-million convergence of events, unrecorded and undocumented. The error was no longer just a visual oddity. It was now a physical anomaly, metal forged in error, form shaped by mistake, released into a world where it should never have existed. Numismatists across the country took notice. Not just because of the error, but because of how rare it was for a coin from the clad era to show both a striking anomaly and a compositional deviation. This wasn't the result of heavy use or abuse. It was a flaw born at the moment of creation, a rare blend of misaligned dies and incorrect stock. Collectors debated its classification. Was it a transitional error? A minting crossover? Or a hybrid mistake caused by material mix-ups and calibration failures? Whatever the label, it was clear that Jeremy's quarter was unique. And unlike many error coins, this one bore no outwardly dramatic flaw. It didn't scream rarity, it whispered it. A soft-spoken mistake hidden within an otherwise ordinary face. Jeremy was invited to showcase the coin at a regional collectors' convention. He watched as seasoned numismatists leaned in, eyebrows raised, as they tilted the quarter under harsh lights. Some nodded. Others stayed quiet longer than expected, their silence an admission of awe. Everyone had questions. Few had answers. By 2022, whispers of another similar coin surfaced, this time from a retired postmaster in Kansas. His coin shared the same off-metal signature, the same light doubling on the eagle's wing, but lacked the sharpness of strike found in Jeremy's specimen. It only strengthened the case that a small batch of flawed planchets had entered circulation that year, processed alongside millions of normal coins without detection. As the coin's provenance solidified, so did its value. Collectors knew they were dealing with something that defied easy explanation. A perfect storm of conditions had created a 1993 Washington quarter that wasn't supposed to exist. One that looked familiar at first glance but held secrets in every ridge and recess, and so, from the depths of an old pawn shop register to the spotlight of competitive auctions, the coin traveled once more. Only this time, every eye was on it. Every expert leaned in to see the nearly invisible fault lines that made it priceless. Its value today stands between $36,000 and $108,000, a staggering ascent for a coin no one expected, a mistake that turned into a marvel. The 1997 U.S. quarter dollar was born in an era of quiet transition. The nation was standing on the edge of a new millennium, the economy was surging, and coin production was humming along steadily. The U.S. Mint, with its refined processes and advanced technology, was focused on efficiency. The familiar image of George Washington still graced the obverse, unchanged since 1932, and the clad composition of copper and nickel was standard across the board. But amid the predictability of mass production, even a well-oiled system can falter in the most imperceptible ways. And somewhere inside the presses that year, something subtle and unexpected happened. A deviation that would go unnoticed by the machines and the human eyes watching them. A flaw that would transform a single quarter into a silent anomaly. The coin found its way into circulation without ceremony. No one paused to examine it. No one realized it was any different from the millions of other 1997 quarters released from the Philadelphia and Denver mints. For years, it passed through cash registers, toll booths, pockets, and purses. It lived an entirely ordinary life, until it ended up in the hands of a substitute math teacher in Vermont named Daniel Reeves. Daniel wasn't a serious coin collector. He had no magnifying glass, no special knowledge. But he had a habit of separating older coins when they caught his eye. This one had something odd in the texture. A strange luster, not exactly dull but not bright either. Almost matte in appearance, with an unusually soft contrast between the fields and the raised devices. It was when he flipped the coin that he noticed something more troubling. The eagle on the reverse looked wrong. The left wing was more defined than the right, but not due to wear. It looked almost doubled, as if the design had shifted slightly during the strike. The letters in United States of America arched closer to the rim on one side, giving the impression that the die had tilted, just enough to affect spacing and depth. Still, Daniel wasn't convinced he had anything extraordinary. So he tossed it into a jar and forgot about it for months. Then, one snowy afternoon, he brought out the jar for his niece, who had recently started collecting coins for a school project. They sorted through dozens of coins, arranging them by decade and mint mark. When they came to the 1997 quarter, Daniel paused again. This time, he compared it to two others from the same year. The difference was obvious now. His quarter was slightly lighter in weight, and the edge was smoother, missing the crisp ridges that usually wrapped around the circumference. The reading seemed incomplete. And there was a slight shift in alignment when flipping the coin from front to back. Something was definitely wrong. Curiosity drove him to research further. He mailed the coin to a small coin dealer who had helped him identify foreign coins in the past. The dealer's response was cautious but encouraging. "It may be struck on a foreign planchet," he wrote, "or possibly a transitional stock. It's worth a professional look." That was all Daniel needed to hear. He submitted the coin to a top-tier grading service. When it came back, the results were surprising. The 1997 quarter had indeed been struck on an undersized planchet, not intended for a U.S. quarter. The metal composition didn't fully match U.S. minting standards either. It appeared the coin had been struck on a planchet meant for another denomination or possibly for a foreign contract. On top of that, the dies had not aligned perfectly. The coin bore evidence of a rotational misalignment and subtle doubling in key areas of the design. This combination of errors, wrong planchet, misalignment, and partial reading, made it a multi-layered rarity. Experts debated the cause. Some suggested that a leftover blank from a foreign coin order had accidentally entered the quarter press line. Others speculated that the planchet had been intended for an experimental minting trial. Regardless, the convergence of these conditions made the coin almost certainly unique. There was no mint mark on the obverse, making it difficult to trace the origin beyond its year. No other 1997 quarter had shown this precise set of traits. Its rarity lay not in one glaring defect, but in the combination of minor deviations that together created a quiet masterpiece of imperfection. Daniel's find began to make the rounds in numismatic circles. Photos were posted to forums. Experts weighed in. A few older collectors recalled hearing rumors about experimental blanks being used in the mid-90s, but there was never confirmation, until now. This quarter had weight, literally and metaphorically. It carried a story embedded in every ridge and ripple, a tale of factory oversight and chance survival. Auction houses began to take interest. The coin's understated error, combined with its perfect wear-free preservation, made it all the more appealing. It wasn't flashy. It didn't boast a dramatic off-center strike or a missing element. Instead, it was a quiet mystery. A piece of accidental art, shaped by machinery and preserved by luck. When the auction day arrived, Daniel watched remotely from his modest home. He had no idea what to expect. The starting bids trickled in slowly, as collectors tested the waters. But once the coin's certified description was read aloud, wrong planchet, partial collar, rotational misalignment, the tempo picked up. A seasoned collector from California raised the stakes. A museum representative from Chicago followed. What had started as a curiosity found at the bottom of a jar was now in the center of a bidding war. As the virtual gavel dropped, Daniel sat in stunned silence. His ordinary 1997 quarter had just sold for a price that dwarfed every paycheck he'd ever earned as a substitute teacher. That unassuming coin, circulated for years without anyone noticing its secrets, ultimately sold for between $30,000 and $90,000. A quiet coin that spoke volumes only when someone finally listened.